a big thank you to the Apple Valley Grace Lutheran Church for being so kind as to let us come here and use their venue tonight. I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time out of your busy lives to attend tonight's event, and for those that have attended on Zoom and taken their time to watch us. It means a ton. My name is Jeff Schottler, and I'm a proud member of the Coalition for Responsible Data Center Development. Our coalition is made up of a diverse and talented group of people just like yourselves. We're all committed to protecting our community. When we realized what tract land development of Colorado was planning to build, right in the middle of long-established residential neighborhoods, both in Farmington and Castle Rock, we had to make a choice. Ignore it or oppose it in public hearings at Farmington Planning Commission and City Council meetings. When our concerns fell on deaf ears, we had no choice but to pursue legal action. We also decided to share our concerns and information with other residents and communities. For me personally, it's safety. It's safety for my family, for my neighbors, and my entire community. My house will sit right around 285 feet away from one of the 10 data center buildings. Nothing of this industrial scale belongs near residential, and neither do the potential hazards that come with this. It doesn't belong near my family or yours. These projects belong in a heavy industrial zone, not in or close to residential neighborhoods. The light, the sound and air pollution during a 5 to 10 year construction period are enough for me to fight. Negative impacts on my wife and daughter hearing this, seeing this, and smelling this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year is enough for me to fight. The generators, the 1 million gallons plus of diesel fuel, the battery storage, and the emissions being expelled less than a football field from their bedroom windows is enough for me to fight. We just couldn't sit by and watch residential land be rezoned, parks get sold, and residential rights get trampled on, only to accommodate an out-of-state developer with unknown end users. For the last year and a half, we have resisted and questioned the details or the lack of details on the Farmington Technology Park since the day it became public. This fight has taken the coalition all across the state, giving speeches, presentations, attending meetings, doing fundraisers, public info events, and just simply learning. Please know that the only reason the Farmington Technology Park did not break ground in 2025 is 100% because of the coalition, our efforts, and the lawsuits we filed against Farmington. Without the coalition and the hard work of each of its members, the Farmington Technology Park would be the heaviest active construction site Dakota County has ever seen. Tonight we have two amazing and knowledgeable speakers to help provide information on the true negative impacts of data centers and how all of our lives will change if this enormous project and others like it are allowed to go forward. This battle is not just for our neighborhoods, but it's for the entire region. Before I move on to the first speakers, you may have any questions. Okay. Our first speaker up is Dr. Carrie Jennings. Since 2016, Dr. Carrie Jennings has the Research and Policy Director at the Freshwater, a 52-year Minnesota nonprofit. She embodies her mission to inspire and empower people to value and preserve water, a licensed professional geologist. She applies her understanding of geology and hydrology to impact policies aimed at improving groundwater sustainability. Formerly with the DNR, she worked to establish and maintain scientific and technical standards for groundwater availability and sensitivity maps. She was also a senior scientist at the Minnesota Geological Survey, during which she mapped the glacial deposits of half the state. She is an adjunct professor in the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of Minnesota. We're excited to hear her take on the effect of hyperscale data centers on groundwater. Carrie?
Where you want me? One moment. Okay, how's that? Good? Feels a little echoey. I'm I'm trying to advance the slides and nothing's happening. What should I point at? Am I, all right. Okay, so this does not work to advance the slides?
Pointing at the computer.
Where's the computer?
The computer's right here.
Okay, okay. And then if you can get that thing to go away so we can read the top. Sorry for the adjustments, because that's where my headings are on these slides. So that's just me, and I'm going to talk more generally about the policy and practice of citing all large water users, not just data centers, because when data centers go, there will be other industries looking to Minnesota for our water. This is proven to be the case. Okay. So what does freshwater do? I'm research and policy director, so we do research and policy. That's easy. And we also do education and engagement. We have a water steward in the front row. We have things ranging from a 9-month certificate program for adults who want to become more engaged with their local watersheds and understand surface water management. And then we also have events like this and events for legislators, everything in between. We work with school teachers as well. And mostly what we try to do, this is going to be a little frustrating to get this to go. I don't know what I'm aiming at here.
Just ask Cathy.
Okay, I don't like to say next slide because I have a lot of animation. So what we do is we try to communicate, coordinate, and collaborate across various sectors to drive action by groups like this, by people like you. And one of the things we've done actually in the Great Lakes region, in EPA Region 5 from here to Ohio, is studied states to understand what kind of groundwater governance they actually had. Not just states, but the tribal governments within the same geography, because there are many different entities could potentially play a role in groundwater governance. And I want to make a distinction between groundwater governance, which is this definition, how people like you and your institutions like your state, your local governments collaborate to create laws, policies, and decisions to manage your shared groundwater. And I'll give you the punchline. There is no groundwater governance structure in any of the states in the Great Lakes right now for groundwater quantity. We deal with quality, but we don't talk about quantity very well. So one of the things that you probably have heard a lot about and might confuse with governance is groundwater management. That's what our agencies do. That's what the DNR does. That's what the PCA does. They take the laws, the citizen input, and they translate that into rules that they then follow. So they're not very creative institutions. They're managers of what we tell them to manage. So I know that there's been some probably frustration in communications with the DNR. That's because they're just playing by a rule book that has been created for them. They don't really operate outside of those rules. When we were working on this project, defining groundwater governance across the Great Lakes, people were just like, this sounds so Humphrey School, so like out there, just so not very practical until data centers came up. And then people were like, oh, there might be a reason where we collectively need to talk about how we can better manage our groundwater quantity. And it should be a conversation of the people that share that water, not some state level conversation. So really what you need, that's a little hard to read, but what you need to support just economic health, prosperity that's inclusive of everybody is these different factors. So we need the groundwater science. We need to understand where the groundwater is, what layers host it. That's a geology problem. We need to understand, we need to have laws then to protect it. So the legislature needs to understand it well enough to get some laws in place. We do have probably the best laws in the Great Lakes region for groundwater protection. You need a permitting process that's played out by the DNR, but I think the big missing piece has been stakeholder engagement. So I think these have all been done without the input of the people of Minnesota, at least to the level we would like to see. There we go. So our work on groundwater governance, this is the region we're talking about, and so we were describing the existing system and how adequate it was to support sustainable use. And We have a report that is an overview of the different states' hydrologic knowledge production, how much they spend on it, what the institutional support is for groundwater. You know, is it all like in the Wisconsin DNR? In Minnesota, it's in lots of different agencies. The current approaches and the challenges. And so that was our first phase of report, and we got more funding from the Joyce Foundation to engage further in this work. And we have a second report where we hosted conversations in the Mishindo Aquifer. We deliberately chose places that were messy, complicated, and shared some tribal jurisdiction. So this was 3 states, Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio, and the Noticepi Band and Potawatomi in this area. We chose an area in north central Wisconsin, the lowest productive aquifers in the state, and we met at Lac de Flambeau, and we were in Vilas County. We were in the Chicago metropolitan area with Chicago Metropolitan Planning District, and then we were in Scott County, and we were deliberately talking to people that were engaged in the conversation around Niagara water bottling. And these conversations helped us kind of come up with recommendations for how groundwater governance should actually look. Click. There we go. Okay, and the problem in general with now suddenly people got interested is, well, the speed of policy is really slow compared to the speed of business. And everything was hitting the fan on last legislative session, and people were coming up short. I'm sorry, this looks really distracting. And the format changed. So what we learned was that Minnesota is a target for these water-intensive industries. I hope this didn't happen on many slides, because I can't even read that.
We had a, I'm sorry, we just cannot make that disappear. We've got so many cameras.
Okay, I'm just, yeah, it feels like the format of the slides changed too, so I can't read the words exactly. But in addition to data centers, sustainable aviation fuel is potentially a large water user. It looks like you might need 100 to 200 gallons per 1 kilogram of fuel that's produced if you use green hydrogen. There's the water bottling plant I already mentioned, pharmaceuticals, there's other water-intensive industries. Some of them actually need water for their product. Some of them are using water for cooling or something else that a substitute could be used for. We were approached by a lot of cities. I'm going to go on since the slide's kind of pointless. I'll just say that the challenge, I think, when an industry or anything like this happens is that an issue is emotional. It hits you, you feel it in your gut, wherever you feel stress. The solutions are often highly technical. Give me a pointer that works, please. Solutions are technical, and next slide, who actually has the clicker? Can you just click it for me? And then decisions are political. So this is how things play out naturally. The political decisions don't necessarily circle back and try to resolve some of the emotional issues that arose. This is the progression of solutions, and that's just an uncomfortable reality that I think we deal with. This is a quote of a friend of mine, Kelton Barr. We started in 2025 getting questions from city administrators in places that we couldn't quite put our finger on. We didn't understand why we were hearing from Byron down outside of Rochester and Hampton and Farmington. It was just those questions we were getting weren't making sense to us. Electricity was on the mind of these cities, not water. They were wondering what else they should be asking for, what they didn't know, who they should be talking to. Do they need to talk to their neighbors? Was there some need for regional planning? And this didn't make sense to us, this distribution of questions coming in didn't make sense to us from a groundwater perspective or a water perspective. But when we looked at the NREL map, the National Research Energy Lab map of fiber networks and electric infrastructure, then you could kind of see why certain places were being approached. It really is a grid question. We're looking at the Southern Dakota County and farther south, so all of the ones from Farmington, from Lakeville to Farmington down to Pine Island and Byron are on this network. North Mankato here, Becker, which didn't make sense at all from a water point of view, was on one of these grids. So that was the infrastructure map that was being used by the data centers with the assumption that water would be there. So there's a tension in having a sustainable water supply. We do have legislation that says the DNR should only allow permits for water extraction that are sustainable. But they don't have a very actionable definition of what sustainable is. If you talk to a person sitting at their desk, and if you were here a month or two ago and heard from Amanda Yord, or was it Eileen? Eileen Considine was here. Ellen. They were talking about, well, you know, how do we say that this well is not sustainable, but that well is, if they're pumping the same amount and it's just one more well? What is the actual definition? So we understand from city managers' points of view that they want to keep your tax dollars low, and they want to keep jobs in the community, and but they also want a certain amount of rooftops and housing for their individuals that are living in the city. So they're playing this kind of balancing game for how much industry do they attract to balance and offset the expense they have to pay for their infrastructure. So a lot of them are looking, because they're in some kind of financial straits, they are looking for that magic solution. So they need to balance this economic development with secure futures. Are you advancing now? Okay, next. So this is slowly, as we go through here, this is the typical development process today. The Department of Employment and Economic Development hears from a data center or other large industry. They look to their regional managers, their regional deed staff. And then what has been happening, you're getting ahead of me here, is that the deed approaches the municipalities directly. So they're skipping a whole bunch of steps and going straight to cities and asking cities for their appropriated water that they're not currently using. Cities usually ask for water on a 10-year time frame that is aligned with the comprehensive plans. It's an allocation that the DNR allows them to have. It's not like they have extra water. This is what they've planned to use in the next 10 years. But the data centers and other large industrial users are coming in and saying, hey, you're not using all that allocated amount. How about if we tap into that? Next. So they have reached some kind of agreement with the city. This is often, non-disclosure agreements are signed during this process. And it's not until the deal is kind of worked out that it starts to become public. Next. And then that's when you react. That's when you hear about it for the first time. And sometimes, like in Hermantown, these conversations have been going on for a year or more, and people are alarmed. Next. And so the possible adverse outcomes are very clear in your situation if the city starts to draw down their well and creates a cone of depression, which is a general depression of the water table in the aquifer that you share with them. Your well might be too shallow to get water anymore, so there might be well interference problems. There might be an increased water rate. You might have other environmental impacts, like Elko Market is seeing that not the city, but the individuals with private wells around the Niagara water bottling plant are in a 5-mile radius getting manganese and arsenic increases in their well water. Manganese is a neurotoxin, arsenic is a carcinogen, and there's no resolution for that currently. And then often the city can be saddled with this infrastructure if they haven't had the developer created, and that might also increase your tax burden down the line. Next. So click through these kind of slowly. So one of our useful statutes in Minnesota is a priority of water use. This legal instrument clearly states that domestic use is the highest priority. And next. And power plants that have a contingency plan, and then small users, next, and then agricultural irrigation or processing of irrigated products. So this is important in Dakota County because your needs supersede the irrigation that's happening around you, including golf course irrigation. Next, power plants without production, next, other uses in excess of 10,000 gallons per year, and then non-essential uses of water. One more click. That shifted a little bit. Oop, don't go. That should be circling number 5. So other uses in excess of 10,000 gallons a day should be what's circled there. That's where industrial users fall. That's where data centers should fall. But what they're doing right now by connecting up to municipal water supply is making it really hard for that to be enforced. Now, in a recent ruling the DNR made in the Upper New Market situation, they said that this really only factors in during drought when there is shortage, and then it's up to the city to be the one to turn that water off to the water bottling plant. If the city has signed an agreement with whatever industry it is that they will never shut off that water, then they're going to be in violation of contract and lawsuits will follow. So the message is DNR is relying on the cities to enforce that number 5 priority of use, at least in the Upper New Market case. Next. So the issues we see, there's probably 4 of these, so let's go slowly through those. The projects have been moving faster than water planners can react. Next. The cities need data and tools to evaluate, but when they sign non-disclosure agreements early, they don't have the ability, or they feel like they don't have the ability to talk to the people with the data, like the Department of Natural Resources, like Dakota County. Next. The short-term incentives are just too attractive, and they're a lot easier to consider than long-term sustainability of groundwater. Next. No community engagement. Next. And then there are a lot of stakeholders. Now, I don't think there are that many. You can host a meeting and have a lot of people come in, but that is one of the issues that we see in some cases. Next. So there were some stopgap measures that were passed last legislative session, and you've probably heard about that within your coalition. Next. Large industries are encouraged to coordinate with Minnesota Business First Stop. That is something that DEED, Department of Employment and Economic Development, hosts. It's a website. Stop. It is something that's likely reviewed by all of the agencies to see if there's going to be any red flags. And they have a new definition for what a large-scale data center is, as far as electric generation and water use. I feel like there's a little problem with that because it's just data center. It's not all large water users. They're being specific, a little too specific for legislation. There is a pre-application process with the DNR so that they can evaluate the 100 million gallons per year use. They're requiring more transparency in how they're reporting water and energy use. Next. But then they're just encouraging water conservation. Next. And have an outline of energy fees and encouraging renewable energy. None of these are things that are required. There's probably going to be some legislative fixes next session as well, if there's appetite for it. And I know that both your senator and representative from Farmington, Senator Liskey and Representative Roach, I've talked to them both at the legislature, and they're in favor of more controls over data center development. Next slide. So, but me, I'm a geologist, and so I look at this as fundamentally, I want to see that infrastructure map with the utilities overlain with a water map, which would be a geologic map. I really want to have the intersection of those things be part of the decision-making process. So click through these kind of quickly, then I'll go them. So I'm going to ask these questions in order. What's the distribution of, distribution of usable groundwater? Who's already using it and how much are they using? Who are you sharing it with? Are there other concerns with high volume water use? What are the societal priorities and what are alternatives to using groundwater? Next slide. So the map on the right is the bedrock. That is the first bedrock that hosts usable groundwater. Places that are white don't have bedrock with usable groundwater. So that's my first screening tool. Don't put large water users in the white space in Minnesota. It's just not going to work. I've gave this talk. Cathy asked me to give this because I gave this talk to the Attorney General's Water Task Force, and the guy from Brainerd said, I didn't know that. Somebody needs to tell us that we don't have water up here. And, you know, they have plenty of lakes, but if their well drillers are drilling, they don't try to go into the bedrock, which is probably crystalline rock of some sort. They find some little sand body in the glacial sediment and use that, or they use a surface water body to support their communities. The map on the left shows you the thickness of glacial sediment. So fortunately for greater Minnesota, it gets really thick out there. That's in meters, and so there's, you know, 900 feet of glacial sediment in some places. And there's been lots of different advances of glaciers. They tend to spackle a landscape with something that looks like wet cement, but they also have a lot of meltwater that makes sand and gravel bodies that host usable groundwater. Next slide. This is kind of my best image of what usually glacial sediment over usable bedrock looks like. This is from northwestern Ohio. Our glacial tills are clay like that, upper layer. And then there they have some limestone bedrock to use. So that limestone bedrock has enough cracks, vertical and horizontal, that's where the water's held. And that's when you put a well down there with a screened interval, that's what you're sucking water in from. It's very rare in Minnesota to have larger chambers underground. There are no rivers. Next slide. But fortunately, in the southeastern part of the state, we have bedrock like that you saw in that last slide. And in fact, it looks a lot like the bedrock in these blue colors here. As you get up into Dakota County, the first bedrock is probably sandstone in a lot of places, like Castle Rock is, if you've ever been to the rock before, it kind of got degraded. There's a little bit of limestone on top, but then it's a pillar of really soft sandstone. Where else could you see that? It doesn't, the sand, well, as you go out towards Randolph, and that little airport where they fly the gliders, you know, those flat-topped uplands out there, Stanton, have limestone on the top and then sandstone on the sides, and then there's sandstone kind of all around underneath the glacial sand and gravel. So our first bedrock varies between limestone and sandstone. But what we have then on top of that is sand that's come off of a melting glacier. So a lot of the Vermilion watershed and the Cannon River watershed was deposited by an ice sheet that was parked basically at I-35 and sending water to the east to what is the Mississippi now, and forming the big sand plains. In fact, we're on one of the bigger sand plains here in Apple Valley, and you probably know there's a lot of gravel pits around here, and that's what they're mining. They're mining the outwash or the glacial stream sediment from the glaciers that were at I-35, sending water out here. I remember when the Target was built here and just thinking, oh man, they just paved over some of the best gravel in the metro area. So I think about these things. Next slide. I think you went backwards, maybe. Let's just go ahead. So this is what a glacial aquifer looks like. There's sand under till. And you might drill a well down through that upper layer that's clayey, and then get into that sand layer, and that would be your aquifer if you were up on the Iron Range, for example. Next slide. So who's tracking this? So it's the job of your geological survey to do that mapping, and they are mapping it so that they can understand which layers are hosting water and how much water there is. The DNR then collaborates with the U.S. Geological Survey, and all of those little orange dots you see there are some wells that were put in the ground specifically to measure water levels. And some of them have telecommunication on them and are doing real-time monitoring water levels. Other require people to go out and drop a little thing down the hole and measure what the water level is. But they're plotting those changes with time so they can understand how the water level varies with the climate and also with use. So we have one of the densest networks, and it's very dense in the metro area, and places like Michigan don't have any much pulse on what their water is doing underground. Next slide. So DNR is the one that's monitoring the groundwater. A different section issues the permits. A different section evaluates well interference. But those hydrologists kind of all talk to each other at the DNR. Next slide. Next, click a couple times. There's some words. Look, there should be some words there. They disappeared. So, the you can think of an aquifer or groundwater as a bank account. There's water under there, but how did it get there? Well, it got there by rain or glacial melt. Some kind of precipitation or glacial melt. It's no magic. It had to come from the sky at some point. Next slide. I have concerns of when when the water was last recharged into the ground, how long it resides there, and then how quickly we're pumping it out. And you would like to think of sustainable use as being a balance between income and outcome, like your checking account. You want a regular paycheck and you can spend, you might want to save. Groundwater can be very young in Minnesota. In the parts of this irrigated landscape, the water soaks in right away. And that's why they need to irrigate, because it soaks in right away and it kind of goes away at least from the root zone of crops that have shallow roots. So you might see irrigation in a large part of this area in eastern Dakota County. All of those gray circles are places that have the center pivot irrigators. So that's the center of a well, and then the irrigator that spins around, you can see it right there. You know what that looks like in real life, I think. And you've seen it from the air as well. Scarcity is a problem in landscapes like this because what we're seeing more is flash droughts. And flash droughts that occur during the growing season require people to pump and irrigate their water. The problem with irrigation is that they have to construct their irrigation well the same way you construct your drinking water well. So they have to go down to a very clean, deep bedrock aquifer to irrigate from, but then they're sprinkling it in the uppermost sand. And it's not getting back to that deep aquifer very quickly. And in fact, it does kind of create a gradient that drives the kind of high nitrate, high agricultural contaminant water deeper into the ground because they're depleting something down low and putting it up top, and then it recharges more. Dakota County has some really interesting visualizations that show how much deeper the nitrate pollution is getting into the ground from increased use. Next slide. So these are things we have to keep in mind as we're looking at the next decade and half a century of projected climate change, because although the total precipitation is on the left by mid-century, and then projected change in summer precipitation is on the right, the brown areas are projected deficits. We might have the same annual precipitation, but if we don't have precipitation in the summer, in the growing season when the irrigators are using it, if we have longer dry spells and hotter days, and plants reach their wilt point more quickly, then we're going to be using more water for irrigation. So we have to be prepared. Irrigation, again, is a higher priority of use than industrial users. Next slide. I'm afraid none of my words are going to show on this because they didn't show on the last slide. I think all my text changed colors. Can you click and see if anything shows up? Okay. So what this is a map of, because I was considering the Great Lakes, this is a map of population density in the Great Lakes. And I always think of Chicago as kind of the informal capital. And then we've got, Minneapolis, St. Paul. We've got some other dense areas, Detroit and Windsor and Buffalo. These are on either a Great Lake or a Great River. And as you get away from places that have abundant surface water, I think it's especially stark in Canada, as you get into places that have crystalline bedrock, not a lot of water available, you don't see population. You really cannot support population growth in areas that don't have a Mississippi River or a Great Lake. St. Cloud is kind of like on the edge, I would say. They've got the river there. They have granite. They don't have bedrock water. So you risk just certainly interfering with other water users if you put a large water user out in other areas. And so I would say I caution against placing large water users far from a surface water source. And in your setting, I caution large water users going in the urban fringe, where you have a mix of municipal wells and then a lot of private wells. because it's kind of a recipe for well interference of a lot of people, and I think it's over 1,000 in your case. The similar situation happened in Blaine on the north side of the metro a couple years ago, where the city of Blaine added a new well, wasn't permitted, started pumping, and depleted a bunch of homeowners and created well interference. Let's click another one. And I wouldn't do things where there's only glacial sediment, click, and where there's seasonal water scarcity, irrigation. Next slide. So other concerns with increased pumping. Next. Migrating existing contamination is a concern. Click one more time. This is a simplified map that's produced by the Pollution Control Agency that shows places where we know there's underground contamination. And usually that's like an industrial site that has leaked something, you know, probably nothing like gasoline, because we'd see those at every corner if it were gas tanks, but significant industrial contamination. If you start pumping really hard on a well and you already have existing groundwater contamination here, you are potentially drawing it to your pumping center. And you need to redefine, for increased pumping, you need to define the flow field to that well. The calculation that your city makes that they're required to make for their drinking water supply management area, it's called DWSMA, one of the worst acronyms that they use at the state. It's just really the outline of what they think is going to come to the well in 10 years. So they're not protecting water everywhere forever. They're just saying in 10 years that pollution might be here and we should start thinking about treating it. But a DWSMA, or the supply area, changes with increased pumping significantly in your case. So migrating existing contamination is an issue. Next slide. Click. And then mobilizing harmful geogenic constituents. This is what's happening at Elko New Market right now. Manganese and arsenic, which are naturally in the ground, in the glacial sediment, and also in the bedrock. For some reason that is not understood by the DNR, the USGS, or the Department of Health, for some reason these constituents started showing up in the private wells of people within 5 miles. It cost people their treatment systems, sometimes just a filter, sometimes the whole system got trashed to the tune of $6,000. Some people drilled new wells, $20,000. Supposedly these people are to be compensated by the city of Elko New Market. The city tried to send checks to people that were very low, probably in anticipation of a class action lawsuit that might be coming their way. So the city has not really done what the DNR is requiring them to do, which is to compensate all landowners for what they actually paid for the impact. So these are also constituents in your area. Next slide. I'm going to skip that. Next. This is kind of esoteric, but I do want to say that it's groundwater pumping now exceeds Arctic ice melt for sea level rise. So groundwater pumping that's coming out, stored water taken out of the ground, sending down the Mississippi River is raising sea level more than ice melt at this point, according to this science article. And this is a reputable journal, Science Advances. So that's another reason to maybe keep groundwater where it is, help it get back into the ground, keep it local. Next slide. So next, click through these. So who else should we be talking to? You. Members of hyper-local organizations like yours are the first ones to see impact. But they're not often included in the decision-making space. And I know your group has been active for a year now and has, been up there in the Attorney General's office, been with the legislature. It's hard. It takes a year of your life. It takes your savings. It takes your retirement funds. And when the process for how to be included is not clear and transparent, you have to figure out what your alternate path is. It leads to fear and distrust in government. It perpetuates potential environmental injustices that already existed. Like imagine a community where there was nobody with the capacity or the resources to kind of track down how to do an EAW or an EIS or talk to the Attorney General. There's a lot of poor communities that wouldn't have the capacity to do this if they're just trying not to be arrested by ICE. So when a governance pathway is not established, you have to take varying routes for your feedback, and that can gum up the works, which maybe is a good thing because it slows down the business approach so policy can catch up. But it leads, you might have the legal system, media attention, you might figure out a formal environmental review process. I know in Elko, Newmarket, there are a lot of public protests in weather like this, people standing outside the city council building. But if you start with inclusive bottom-up practice, then you're building it together and you're going to have more confidence in what it emerges. That's what we're trying to do right now with a project we have with 2 graduate students at the Humphrey School, a faculty, Elise Harrington, and somebody from the law school, James Cromwell. We're working with 3 cities in the greater Rochester area. They've invited us in to help them think about what they as cities need to be doing. They're taking a year. They said pause, pump the brakes here, let's take a year, let's engage locally, let's have widening circles of community engagement, and let's come up with a playlist and share our best practices and find out what the community wants. Next slide. So that's what we're doing with Byron, Stewartville, and Lewiston. We just had our first meeting with the city administrators last Friday. Next slide. But what we hope comes out of this is, what we did there was kind of played a desktop game, role-playing. We had the graduate students had evaluated case studies, interviewed a lot of people from Virginia and Iowa and around the country that have had data centers, and they came up with scenarios for us as role-playing city administrators to evaluate and make decisions on. So ordinance language and where we were going to cite this and how we were going to bring in our utility, and it was useful, and we're going to refine that game for the larger groups we're going to work with. Next slide. And so our outcome, next slide, click through these, is going to be presenting this research-backed information. The cities will have community-informed priorities. They will be in a much more proactive negotiating position. We keep hearing again and again, cities are in the driver's seat. They can ask for anything from these companies. They can ask for really robust community benefit agreements and long-term decommissioning of the sites. So there's lots of things that cities last year just weren't even thinking about, in Minnesota at least. And then they can end up with a more secure water and energy future and kind of avoid all the commotion. Next slide. So I'm still clicking through those questions at the very beginning. What are alternatives to groundwater where water is essential? And again, I want to emphasize that where water is essential, because we've heard from data centers that you can use electricity only. Meta is just using electricity. They were there first. They got a lot of the electricity the state is producing. If all 11 data centers that were proposed for this part of Minnesota went in, it would double the electric output of Minnesota, and that's not likely to happen, which is why there was this race last year for people to get in. But we would love to see them using surface water, including artificial impoundments like the mine pit lakes and the Iron Range, which have to be pumped out anyway. Or there's the air traffic control place up in Rosemont that's built too deep into the ground, so they're always pumping groundwater out of the ground to keep the basement dry. So a place like that would be a place to use water. Next slide. And then we'd also love to see industrial wastewater being reclaimed and used. So make it something with the Metropolitan Wastewater Treatment Plant. All the water that the Twin Cities pumps out of the ground and uses comes through that place and is recycled there. So could that be used? The policy barrier to this right now is that it's not a simple permitting path, and because of the race to get in the ground and get built, the companies are unwilling to explore this path. And let me just walk you through it. If the rain falls on a roof, it could potentially be contaminated, and the Pollution Control Agency has jurisdiction over rain that hits a roof. If it goes into a stormwater pond, the PCA, Pollution Control Agency, again has to control how stormwater is managed because it could have contaminants. And the DNR also comes into play because now it's a water of the state. If it is used to irrigate a ball field, like at CHS Field, the DNR, that's an appropriation of state water. So the DNR has to issue a permit for that appropriation. The Department of Health cares because you might walk through that sprinkler, and if there's a contaminant in it that makes you sick, then they care. So they don't want you to get Legionella or whatever from that water. And then if you decide to use it to flush the toilets in the ball field, all those agencies plus the Department of Labor and Industry get involved, and DLI is the plumbing code. And so they have to describe what color those pipes should be and how that water should be handled once it's in the building. So this is just, it's a maze. It does happen, reuse does happen, but it takes a long time. It's not something that's right off the shelf. Next slide. Let's click through this. I don't want to talk about this. But these are all the different entities that might get involved in water decisions, from the federal to the tribal to the state to the community to the watershed district to the city level. And this also creates complexity for large water users coming in, because like not very many parts of the country have watershed districts where they have taxing authority and they have some decision-making capacity. That's unique to us. Next slide. So we can expect more large water users. The rest of the country sees us as water rich uniformly. Next. So I think that says the state. I wish that would go away. The state should make water data available, more readily available, to guide businesses to areas with sustainable water. Currently, we're incentivizing them to come here and not telling them where to go. We're just, it's like having someone come to your house and not giving them a drink of water, saying where the bathroom is. Just, they're here forever. Next slide. Planners, where we have planners, you know, South Metro area, Seven County Metro has planners, but the rest of the state doesn't have regional planning. But they could engage across political jurisdictions, develop shared tools, and use the results to guide regional development so that cities aren't competing with one another. So Lakeville and Farmington and Hampton and whatever aren't like trying to be the first in the gate. Cities should be consulting their stakeholders and frontline communities like you to identify the trade-offs that they're proposing and prioritize what your choices are. Next slide. The state should be requiring and incentivizing circular water design, making that easier, and heat, using waste heat as well, because that's really what data centers are generating, is waste heat. They don't have to generate wastewater. And require transparency in how that's being reported. And then, because I made this for the Attorney General, and I was trying to think, what does the Attorney General do? I think they should be ensuring even enforcement of the existing laws and making sure that agencies are fulfilling their responsibilities, because currently the agencies are afraid of getting sued. They're not as afraid of getting sued by you as they are the companies that are proposing to build, because those people have better lawyers, or you know, they can pay their lawyers for longer. So that's why they look like they respond to the industry, because they're more afraid of those lawsuits. And then the Attorney General could help deal with these environmental injustices for communities that lack resources. We all know that White Bear Lake, actually really grateful that there were some wealthy people in White Bear Lake that kept a lawsuit going for 12 years against the DNR. That did change the way the DNR is doing water policy, but not every community can afford to do that. I think that's one more click. Yeah, I think that's it. So I hope I left you some time alone.
Thank you very much. Did anybody have any questions?
Oh, you wanted them now?
Dr. Carrie?
I can wait to the end.
Hi, Carrie. My name is Denise. I live in Farmington, actually Castle Rock Township. And early summer last year, I had lengthy discussions with people with the DNR. And I had some concerns because they explained, kind of simplified the process of the permitting. That's what I want to kind of talk about. They said that the City of Farmington will apply for the water permitting because the developer is going to be going through their permit.
Right.
And they said that actually at that point, which was summer of last year, so that was 2025, they did not anticipate Farmington making their application until sometime 2027. And I kind of wondered, why would they apply for a permit well after things were going to be being built?
Yeah.
And then they said that Farmington will apply for the water permit, and when they apply, they will tell the DNR how much water is going to be used. And then according to what Farmington's numbers are, the DNR is going to analyze the area, and they'll be able to tell whose well will be affected and to what degree. And at that point, Farmington has to go to each of those wells being affected and somehow mitigate what's going to be happening. And then, so my concerns are,
That's backwards.
oh, is it backwards?
Oh, no, I think you're right. I
Yeah.
told you that, but.
Yeah, and then, so Farmington will promise to do the fixes before a problem happens. But then if after the fact they fix things, then if we have problems with our well, then our recourse would be to make application or a claim for well interference. So one of my big concerns is that who do we believe Farmington's numbers? I mean, who polices that? Who's going to check to make sure that those numbers are accurate? And what happens if a lot more water is being used than what the permit states?
Yeah, and first let me start with talking to the DNR is who did you talk to? It matters, and there's a regional hydrologist who's out here and reports to someone at the central office, but is pretty autonomous for this region. And then there's the people that deal with well interference complaints in the central office. They're different, and they don't necessarily even talk to each other. I know that up in Newmarket had problems with their regional hydro, didn't even want to elevate their questions to the central office, just decided to dismiss them on his own, and that was problematic for them. So it matters who you talk to there, and that process you described sounds like the DNR has already allowed them to appropriate the water. So it sounds like they're going to permit the water use, allow the interference to occur, and then address it. And that is not what should be happening.
Well, they said that when Farmington submits their application, the DNR will take the numbers from the application and make an analysis
Into a model, yeah.
to see what wells are going to be affected. And then Farmington promises to mitigate whatever problem.
But that's where they could say no. That's where they could also say, no, this appropriation will impact too many private well owners. So I feel like that's a decision point where you should be able to intervene. It might not be an easy place to intervene. What you just described is what exactly is happening in Alpena Market, and there's now 800 people that have been impacted, and they have not even had the data they requested. They had made a Freedom of Information Act request that wasn't fulfilled, and none of them have been compensated to the level that they've had expenses.
Well, it seems that it would make sense that the application for the water would be done really early on.
And supposedly that's this new screening that's coming out of this legislative session. They might have got in under the old rules, but Jason Meckel at the DNR believes that this new screening process will allow them to evaluate that water use earlier. But it feels like this is still the old model, where let's see it interfere and then we'll deal with it.
What can we do?
I think you have some sympathetic city employees. I don't know if they're still under their non-disclosure agreements. Are they? No?
There's only one.
Only one?
Yeah. Everyone else is like, yeah, like, no.
Why would you think they're sympathetic? What gives you that impression?
Well, I think that the people that are, I think sometimes, let me speak more generically about water utilities, they feel like they're not really the respected utility in a community. It's the electric utility that's kind of the one that gets all the attention and makes the decisions. And I know that when we met with some utilities in the Scott County Southwest Metro Planning Group, the water utilities were all shaking their head, just saying they never talked to us about how many more housing units they're going to add and what water use they're adding, and we just can't do it. We just can't find the water. We drill new wells, and it's just, it's expensive to lay that pipe, and so I think that I think they see the reality of providing the water. But I would say that this DNR process, that is something to push back on. And that's something that they're interpreting law and making rules for how they're working as an agency. And you can say, this is not following the statute, you're not using the sustainability law. I didn't put the sustainability language up here, but that is also on the books. Priority of use and sustainability.
Who would we contact though? I mean, how do we push back?
There's a little reorganization happening at the DNR right now. Katie Smith, who was head of Eco Waters, is moving up. There's going to be a gap. I don't know who's going to fill her role, but Jason Meckel is a constant there, and Ellen Considine, who was here at this church a couple months ago presenting for the DNR. But I think you need to go above the regional hydros if they're the people that are kind of you're getting stuck with. Go to the central office.
Actually, that would have been my question, that is it possible to go over? Like you said, they refuse to submit to the central. Can we as a citizen do that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question over here that was submitted earlier, and that is, can water consumption from a hyperscale data center affect municipal wells in addition to private wells?
Yeah, absolutely, because any large pumping center, it doesn't draw the water down evenly. It doesn't just lower it like, gas in your tank. It's more like water in your Slurpee from the Quick Trip. It kind of takes the blue out of the middle. It creates a cone, and so the wells that are shallower within that depressed cone of water level are the ones that are going to be impacted. And even the ones that aren't losing water are potentially, for some reason, getting more of these metals coming into their wells. And it might be because there's an oxygen exchange kind of coming with that lowering water table. There's some kind of oxidation reduction reaction happening that's creating these metals. So, yeah. And it's too expensive for a city to hook you all up to private or to municipal well water because the pipes are just so expensive in places that haven't planned for that and have houses that are on 5-acre lots or so. It's just prohibitive. Yeah.
David Brzlov, 20255 Aiken Road. Just to give you a little bit of update with Farmington, it's like we're on odd, even water restrictions. And I know that I made some concerns at a city council meeting, some other people did too, that when you're already on water restrictions, I know that you're trying to save the water and the aquifers and all that, but you bring in a company like this, and not only are we on odd, even water restriction basis, that we have no water in between noon and 6 o'clock. So if this company starts, how are they relieved by using that much water in those hours when the residents can't?
You're right. They are going to have the same water stress periods in the summer that you do because that's when the data centers need cooled. And they can't restrict. They need the same amount of water 24/7. So that is a problem.
And then another issue that I brought up, and it's hard, I'm just going to throw it out that nobody really can answer it. But Farmington, first of all, we're well known for our trout stream.
Yeah.
And how much water can be pulled out of the ground before we affect the trout, and that we hold, our cities and people before us have held dear to the heritage of Farmington. And I brought this up to them too. It's like, at what rate do you want to risk the heritage of Farmington and the Vermilion River trout stream?
Yeah, and that's something that's easier for the DNR to address for some reason than well interference because Department of Natural Resources works on ecosystems and they understand fish. Jason Meckel used to work at Dakota County on fish, so he's at the DNR on groundwater now. So it's very easy for the DNR to look at interference of pumping with a cold water stream that has special protection. Fens do as well. So that's a lot easier for them to do, and it does feel like that setting, this setting, is very vulnerable because 2 headwaters of the cold water streams are on either side of that. So they're getting groundwater recharge there from probably a shallow aquifer, could be coming from deep in the bedrock, and they need to model that potential impact By the way, I spoke to Trout Unlimited the Monday before Christmas. They wanted your contact information because they wanted to donate money. If you're a 501c3, are you a 501c3?
Yes.
Yes, okay, then they said they could donate money. I'll make sure they do follow up on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then you had mentioned a bit, and I understand it with residents, and if enough water is pumped down, that their wells can dry up. But even for the city, I don't know that the city would be able to really say how much water can be pumped before a city well had to be replaced, and then that would be at the taxpayer's expense. So that's been brought up too. It's,
right.
It's twofold. It's the residents and it's the city's wells too.
Yeah. And before they will drill a new well, usually the water level in a well rises to some level above the bottom of the drilled hole. There's some kind of pressure that the water's under, so it rises up. And usually you have your pump on a pipe that's suspended in the well. Usually they can lower it. There's some kind of capacity to lower the pump before you have to drill a new well. That's not always the case in your domestic wells. They might not have been constructed that way, but they have a little leeway there sometimes.
Okay, we have one more question
Yeah,
that
back there.
somebody sent in.
Oh, there's someone back in this corner.
Okay, oh, sorry.
Hi, my name is Sherry Wisnowski. I live in Lakeville. I guess I came in late. And if you could just catch me up, has it passed that there's a data center going in Farmington, or is it still, I just want to know the outcome.
I think Cathy can address that maybe after I come down. I'm not up to speed on that.
Okay, and then my other question is, do data centers, do they always have to bring, in the water that they bring in to keep things cool, is it just get shoved out and they're always bringing in fresh water, or can it be recycled?
There's more than one design, and so the cheapest, fastest way for them to build something is for it to evaporate and to cool that way, and most of that water's lost. There is what they call closed loop cooling. I've heard an engineer talk about this last week saying it reduces the water use tremendously. They only have to fill the loops once. Maybe they recharge them every few years. But that's what's circling, usually with glycol, to cool things, like heat exchanger. And then it's just water use on site, like for domestic use. But it's not what we see people coming in and asking for. So if that's the preferred design, that's not what Tract and others are approaching cities and asking for. They're asking for much larger volumes.
Yeah.
But that's where the city, if you understand those things, you could say, here's the water we're willing to give you, here's the electric we're willing to give you, here's the land, and this is where it is that we're willing to give you. Play by our rules or go someplace else.
Right.
And that's what an empowered city would do, and that's not what people were doing last year. That wasn't 1.0 data center with cities.
The city asked Tract what they want.
And cities should also be asking, what is going to happen to this facility, this monstrosity in 20 years? Will you take it down? Will you assume the cost of the infrastructure that was built, and things like that? Yeah, I can't address that. I think other people on the coalition can address it. Was there one more question?
Yeah, this one was sent in too. Are there any actions residents can take to either stop or at least force local municipalities to put in safeguards to protect residents from reduced quality of life and excessive resource usage if there are no state or county laws in place?
I think that's what you're doing. I think that you are being heard. People talk about this as NIMBYism, and I know it's not. It's more like they haven't considered these issues and how they're going to affect residents. And you are also helping the other communities around the state. I know that Hermantown has reached out to you, and Elko New Market has coordinated, and there's cities across the citizens across the state and region that are looking to you for how you've led on this. So know that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carrie, for your educated information there. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Feshami. Mo has over 38 years of experience in information technology, with the majority of that as a telecommunications and data center network architect for Fortune 500 companies, including several in Minnesota. That experience has given him insights into cloud service providers and data center operations and the critical resources they consume. He holds a bachelor's in electrical engineering from Virginia Tech University. His interest in the impact of hyperscale data centers began when the City of Farmington initiated plans to spot zone a hyperscale data center in the middle of long-established neighborhoods near his family's home.
I'm going to cut my presentation short, so bear with me because there were a lot of very good questions that were asked, and I think thank you, Dr. Jennings, for being here and answering those questions. All right, next slide, please. The hyperscale data centers have all kinds of things that need to be taken into consideration. And the pie chart you see there is different things that we got to think about. So today, I'm only going to talk about water. Maybe at other opportunities, we'll talk about other aspects. But main topic of my talk tonight is the impact of water and also how power generation ties into that. Next slide, please. Let's skip that one for the interest of time, and we'll go through the next full slide. Just one thing on this, when you think about data centers, the legacy data centers are like those matchbox, little tiny cars we had, and these hyperscale data centers in relation is like an 18-wheel semi-truck. They are completely different. Some people think about data center, that's the matchbox. Hyperscalers are the semi-trucks. Next slide, please. This is a Farmington project. When you see where this data center is being planned to go into, the red dotted areas, and the yellow areas are existing homes in that area. So this is going to interfere with a lot of residential areas in the vicinity of the proposed hyperscale data center. Next slide, please. This is some of the examples of data center that Microsoft has. When you look at this, are you seeing any homes? All of these, wherever they are, different locations, you see desert area, you see some of the vegetation, but you don't see homes in some of their newer data centers, which is not the case in Farmington. Next slide, please. And one more. This is some of the data centers that are coming into our area. Some of them, for the time being, have been delayed. One in Farmington has been delayed. Apple Valley is on again, off again. What I call these, next click please, as zombie data centers. They never go away. Once they find an area that is possibly available for a hyperscaler, if one developer goes away, another one could come in. Or even the same developer would change some of the parameters and come back in. So I don't trust that if one walked away, another one would not come in. The main thing is there to make sure the zoning doesn't change. Next slide, please. Hyperscale data centers house thousands of electronics, and they need cooling water to cool it down. They also need to keep the area with some level of humidity, because if it's too dry, the static electricity can damage the equipment. So not only you cool them, but also you need to keep that area at a certain level of humidity. So when you talk about several million square foot of computer space, that takes a lot of water to just keep the humidity at that level. So they demand a lot of electricity. for Farmington is 708 megawatts of power. That is equivalent of 538,000 homes, average US homes. That's more power than the Monticello nuclear power plant can generate. And all of that power is going to be consumed in that 300 and less than 400 acres in that area. Next slide, please. Let's go. So hyperscalers use a lot of water. Let's go. And what I found out, that it takes even more water to generate the power for that data center to consume. Let's go to the next slide. So this was a filing by Excel to MPCA for one of the power plants. It's a gas power plant, natural gas, which is, as far as all the carbon power sources, it's more efficient. So this power plant that they're trying to bring up, and this was disclosed during a public information gathering. So it's going to generate 575 megawatts of power, and it would use 201 million gallons of water. That's the water they're going to take from the Mississippi River, use it to generate the power, and then dump it back in. Next slide, please. So just one thing, when you bring in water and then produce wastewater, the amount of water you dump back in is less than what you generate. So in my calculation, I wasn't looking at the big number because I didn't have it. I only had the wastewater. So I'm using the wastewater, so my numbers are lower than actual. So next slide, please. So to generate 708 megawatts for Farmington, you need to use 247 million gallons a day to generate that power. Next, so you see for Farmington, the maximum water use is 2 million, almost 3 million gallons of water. So when I add all of these together, next click please. So to operate the technology park hyperscale data center, you're going to need, on a hot summer day, 250 million gallons of water. A small portion of it is for cooling, but a much bigger portion is to generate the power so that that data center can run. And for me, that was like when the light went on. That, hey, as bad as the hyperscale data centers are, and they can cause problems locally, somewhere, in Minnesota or somewhere else, you got to use almost 100 times more water to generate that electricity. So next slide, please. So when we look at, that was just one. We have around 10 or so coming in the Dakota area and vicinity. So next. So the question is, where does that water come from? Next, please. And can our groundwater sustain that? Some of it is surface water, but not all of it is surface water. How would prioritization work? Dr. Jennings mentioned the 6 categories of prioritization. Next, who will enforce that? We got so many different entities that govern that, and then, as was mentioned earlier, if the city allows, which is in the case of Farmington, the city has signed a contract with the developer that they would provide the water. There is no going back. The contract is signed. So during the heat of summer, when we are asking our residents to do odd even days, there is some control over residents, which are priority 1. There is no control on the data center. They have to run 7 by 24 because they have customers that need the equipment there, that needs to be cooled. So where is the equity in that? That we're using domestic water to cool the data center, but we cannot ration that. And some of our local areas in Apple Valley, there is PFAS that they're trying to mitigate. So if the city is providing the water to the hyperscale data center, and they have to mitigate PFAS to be used for something that's not necessarily potable water, who's going to pay for that mitigation? When your data center is a bigger user of water than the entire city. Next, please. And then we have our renewable energy goal. There are localities now that they have to go back and they had planned to decommission their coal power plants, and they have to now keep it going longer. And where there is a co-op, an REA type of power company, who's paying for that? It's the local people that are the shareholders of the co-op that will end up paying for that. And these are, who's monitoring this at the county level, at the state level? You know, we're dealing with them one at a time here and there, but we need to start looking at it as a bigger issue for the entire state rather than just a local problem. Next slide, please. Let's keep going. So if you could just go ahead and go through these. So we have in Minnesota, we have no experience with hyperscale data centers. Our very first one is Meta, that's under construction. It's not fully online. In Minnesota, before all of these, there is a real estate company, fairly large, that keeps track of power available at different data centers. And most of these are legacy data centers, especially in Minnesota. So in the metro area, there was 60 megawatts of power available for data centers. This is before the hyperscalers came in. So when you add all of them, and this is a sample, the image on the right is from Walker Arstein's newspaper reporter that had put together, I added some more data centers since then. But when you add them all up, we're talking about 36,000 megawatts, 3,600 megawatts of power. So our capacity used to be 60 megawatts. And now the demand we know about, there may be more because of non-disclosures, we don't know. So it could be a lot more than 3,600 megawatts. So again, that's a 6,000% increase. Who's going to supply that? When you talk to Excel, there were some questions asked from the CEO, and he said, we're going to meet our clean energy goal. I doubt that with all these numbers. Let's go through so why are they coming here? We have cheap power because of a lot of the work that has been done in the clean energy side. And then water is cheaper here than some of the other states. Land is cheaper here. When you go to Virginia, which is the data center alley, land is so expensive there that data center folks can afford it, but other restaurants or other smaller businesses can't afford the land because the data centers have raised the value of the asking price for the properties there. Small local governments. Here, permitting of the siting of a data center is relegated to the cities. And most of these cities are honestly ill-equipped to grasp the severity of all the aspects of a hyperscale data center. So they see some of it, they're very good in permitting restaurants, shopping malls, development, but hyperscalers are their own strange animals that very few planning commission people or local government units can grasp or do something about all those problems. And the other thing is we give data centers uncapped tax benefits. This was done way back in 2011 to help Minnesota companies get a jump on digital economy. But now you got out of the state developers coming in, and every server, every storage device, air conditioning unit, generators they put in, software they use, annual maintenance on the software, consulting costs they do to bring technology companies in to help them develop it, they're all sales tax exempt. And it's actually last year they even extended it further for more years. So, hey, we've become the new place to come. Next slide, please. So where do we go? So data centers use a lot more water than the cities that host them. So we're trying to push, and all of you can push to your representatives, to your local papers, editorials, make them go to DNR to get their own water. They're a huge water user. Do not allow them to tap into the residential domestic water. Next slide. So we are trying, and again, we hope you, with your help, try to get the state set minimum set of regulations. You know, here in Apple Valley with Meadow Rosemont, the closest neighborhood is about 1,500 feet away, curb to the data center. But if you go to Farmington, it's only 250 feet away. And somewhere else could be even less. So why are the people in Farmington redheaded stepchildren? So we need to have a state to do something that do minimum. So if you want to go above that, make it more stringent, that's fine. That's a locality. But have the state do this. We don't let in Minnesota individual cities regulate the gas pumps at the gas stations. The state goes and makes sure that the gallon is what you get and if the octane rating is what you get. But we let the cities decide permitting and location for a hyperscale data center. So, given that they're not as equipped to challenge all the issues, we think this should be done at the state level. At least set some minimum level of a standard so everybody in Minnesota, no matter where you are, at least has that level of protection. And then maybe even do a special rate class for the water they use. A lot of times, they get the water at a lower rate than the individual consumers because they're high volume user and they make other promises. But create a special rate class for those. Next slide, please. And I think this may be, yes. Thank you very much. Let's forego the questions. Because of the time, I hand it over to Cathy Johnson.
Okay. Thanks so much, Mo. And I don't think we have to be on here at 8:30 on the button, so if you want to stay afterwards for some more Q&A, that'd be great. I also want to point out that the Minnesota Women's Press just dropped off 50 free copies of their January issue, and it's almost all on data centers. So a really good read, and pick up a copy on your way out. Okay. I'm Cathy Johnson, and I chair the coalition, and I really want to thank Dr. Jennings, Mr. Schottler, and Mr. Feshami for sharing your expertise and your experiences. It's been great. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I became vested in data center work like we all did because one was going to be built behind the house across the street from us. And we all panicked when we realized what a strain this would cause on all the things we've talked about tonight. I won't go back into them, but the ironic part is go to the next slide. This is a picture that shows the PUC's standards and the City Council saying we'll be in harmony with existing land use. I don't think that is harmony with farms and houses in beautiful executive homes. There are a lot of problems with data centers. Next slide. And I can stand here honestly and tell you tonight that the court of public opinion is changing on data centers because of things like our coalition, which has really been active in getting the word out, but it's happening all over the United States. And that's great, but the court of public opinion doesn't actually get to be the place where decisions are made about data centers. Our coalition, as well as several other nonprofits, tried, next slide, to force the legislature to establish some regulations about how data centers can come into Minnesota, establish some parameters. But the bill that was passed at the end of 2025 was referred to by Peter Wojanius of the Sierra Club as a big win for billionaires. The protections were very, very skimpy, and I do think the legislature looks at it as an unfinished project, but nevertheless, what exists right now doesn't protect us. As a city, as a coalition, we felt we had to turn to the judiciary to protect us from predatory things that tract land development was trying to do. But the passion for our commitment comes not just from the fact that we're living there. This isn't just NIMBY. We're not just concerned about Farmington. We're concerned about the 12 or so that are coming into the metro area. The other place our motivation comes from is in our gut. Because we have talked to other places and been in touch with them about what happens when data centers come to your community. And we're seeing that environmental protection and environmental justice is being overlooked because predators think it's okay to come to Minnesota and use our collective resources for them to make a profit. That's really what this is all about, is them making a profit. It's a private profit. It's not, these are not Minnesota companies. They ignore the law, they ignore science, and most concerning to me is they ignore the will of the people. And that's not okay in my worldview. And I hope it's not okay in your worldview. So, next slide. What I would like to do is talk really briefly about our lawsuit, because people ask me all the time, what's the deal with the lawsuit? The lawsuit's on hold right now. There's the number. We turned to the judiciary. We have it stalled until we get some findings to be passed down from the judges. And right now we have 3 counts. And I want you to think about your worldview when I'm talking about these counts. Next slide. The first count is breach of an orderly annexation agreement. We have a contract signed between Castle Rock and Farmington that gives Castle Rock the chance to have dialogue and to have teeth and a say in the land use. The second count is declaratory judgment, which means Castle Rock hasn't agreed to this. The city is just steamrolling over us as if they have all the power. And the third count that we have right now is that we want a judicial review of the zoning. The zoning was done with extreme caveats that were admitted by the Met Council, especially on the water use, and yet I'm not making this up. The Met Council literally said we have to agree to Farmington's request to change the zoning because they filled out their application correctly and checked all the boxes. At that point, I wanted to say fire the Met Council and hire a clerk, because if all you have to do is fill out the application right, what good is the Met Council? So that's the kind of stuff that we're up against. Next slide. Since that has happened, we have asked for 2 more counts to be filed, and we're waiting. That's one of the things we're waiting for, the judgment to come down about whether, and our lawyers are extremely optimistic that we will win, and those are environmental counts. They are in violation of the MERA, and they used a tool for evaluating the environment that's entirely shallow. It's called the AUAR. That is the basis of the lawsuits from MCEA, the Minnesota Council on Environmental Advocacy. They have filed suits against 5 cities for those same environmental counts. Unfortunately, Farmington's too far along in the process. The city's already approved the AUAR, the city's already applied and got the zoning changed, and we have to reverse that in court. But I'm hopeful that the MCEA case will prevail, because that could ultimately help us a little bit too, if they win on the environmental. So what's happened today, next slide, Farmington as a city tried to just have our case dismissed. They tried to say we had no standing and that, you know, they ruled the day. Well, they lost. They lost on all 3 counts. We have standing, and we will have our day in court sometime in 2026. As one of the founding members of the coalition, I can assure you that the journey we've been on for the last year and a half has been driven for our passion for our homes and our families and our community, our resources and our quality of life. But it's also driven from our research. We know that life has changed for people that live in parts of the country where hyperscale data centers have come in. And it's not in line with the panacea that Farmington officials have swallowed. We get energy for this fight through our connections with folks that have lived through what Tract is trying to do, and our realization of we're just like them. We're just ordinary folks, grassroots. When we win, and I believe we will protect not only Farmington's as a community, but we will also set a precedent for the state of Minnesota that establishes some guidelines, some minimal environmental requirements and so forth. We will be protecting everyone. I'm asking you to do something tonight that the coalition members have been doing for the last year and a half, and that is to commit to helping us with our legal fees. I'm asking for contributions because so far we have raised approximately $100,000, and we've been told we're going to need anywhere between another 100 and 150, which is why I'm so glad Trump Unlimited is going to help us out a little bit. We've applied for other grants, but we're largely funding that out of a small group of us who have fought hard and paid into it every month, and we're asking for a broader help from the community. And for the people out there on Zoom, we have 80 people, by the way, who signed up for the Zoom. Every contribution matters. All of it goes to litigation costs, not to the coalition, not to damages. It goes to our legal fees. And by helping us, you are in turn helping yourselves and your families and all of our environment by setting standards and letting the world know this is not an acceptable proposal. This is just not okay. On the screen are our GoFundMes. You had an agenda that was handed to you when you came in, and it has our GoFundMe and our Venmo accounts on there. Pledge cards are on the back table, our business card with how to get in touch with us if you want that as well. And I want you to just think about being a part of this, stand with us, be part of the community. Put data centers in their place. And now we have time for more questions. Are there any more questions? Any from the chat? Okay, I am hearing appears you're going to have to really...
I'm probably because I don't know the whole story, but I don't know why communities are so eager to have a data center. Like, what is the upside from a city point of view to have one?
There's a template that's happening not only in Farmington, it's happening all over the United States. This is what the developers do. They find a small cash-strapped town, and they come in and say to the developers, we're going to promise jobs, which the idea of long-term jobs that build out is a myth, and that is extremely well documented in the research. That's not true. Even the construction jobs are often done. You've heard of labor camps that follow the pipeline, for example. A lot of those construction jobs are done that way too. Yes, there will be some local construction jobs, but by and large, the job promise is a myth. And the second thing they promise is a boatload of property tax money. Of course, they never talk about the infrastructure costs. They never talk about the fact that, for example, in Ohio, their electric rates statewide went up 18% last year because of data centers. They don't talk about those downsides. And what they want in return for this big promise of property tax and jobs is for them to sign a non-disclosure agreement and for the city to guarantee them the water out of the domestic water supply, which is what both of our speakers have been talking about. I call it the Kool-Aid. Research blows that pretty much out of the water.
Yeah.
You know, there will be property tax, but they're not talking about what's going to happen if in 10 years there's a better technology.
Right.
Who's going to do the cleanup here?
Yeah.
Well, those buildings at 80 feet tall, and they're not going to be useful for another purpose. What's going to happen if our wells run dry? And in Des Moines, where they have 5 data centers, they had a period of time that really shows the control the city has in controlling the water. Because their drought became so severe, they had to shut down their public water parks and pools for a time because they had already guaranteed the water to the data center. In the same meeting in which our city planner presented the development contract to the city council for approval, later in that same meeting, the city planner said, I strongly recommend you consider cutting the rate for using the sewer system and water evacuation by 50% for the data center. Now that infrastructure is owned by the citizens. Why should the data center be paying 50% for that? So when I spoke to the council last time, my kind of theme was, who's bearing the risk? You know, these developers want to come in and use our collective resources. They want to change the lives for ordinary folks who've built their whole families in this community. And they want us to take the risk of, what if it goes belly up? What if AI is a bubble? What if?
Yeah.
So here's another thing. I really strongly encourage you to go to our website. My husband, Gary, is kind of the librarian who has cataloged many, many research articles by topic. You can click on them, they'll pop up on your computer. There's more than you could ever have time to read, but do educate yourself a little bit because there is a lot of Kool-Aid floating around out there. There's something else I encourage you to do too. On February 3rd is caucus day. I have been told by some people who are way more politically savvy than me that one of the most powerful things an individual can do in terms of influencing the law is to go to the caucus. On our website, we will have, caucuses are partisan. There's a Democratic caucus and a Republican caucus, and we will have sample caucus resolutions that you can get off of our website that will be, but they're about data centers. They're not about politics. And data centers are interesting because it crosses party lines. There's people in both parties who drink the Kool-Aid and people in both parties who are going, hold on, wait a minute. So there will be information out there, so don't be afraid. Take the caucus resolution or just show up. But one of the most important things that you can do is just go to the caucus. Write to your legislators, let them know you're concerned about your community and you feel, yeah, Farmington might get a little bit of property tax. It's all being subsidized by the whole rest of the state. Electric rates aren't going to go up for Farmington residents. It's going to go up for every resident. And how long is it going to take before communities are going, wait a minute, why aren't we getting some of this benefit? There will be push, I would think, eventually for regional distribution of that. That's my guess. But go to the caucuses, write to your legislature, and one more thing, if you can fit it in your brain, and this will be on our website. On February 18th is a statewide rally. We want to fill the rotunda of the downtown St. Paul at the Capitol to let the legislature know how we feel about data centers. So please promote that, show up. It's between 10 and 11:30. There's lunch going to be in a church that's adjacent to the Capitol afterwards to be purchased. And then we'll have tabling set up, and we're inviting the legislators to come into a room in the Capitol called the Vault. So we have a chance to talk to them and express our feelings about data centers. A friend of mine at MCEA said, when a bill passes in the spring, usually the issue sort of dies down in the next legislative session. The bill that passed was very weak, but he said usually even if a weak bill passes, it's kind of a done deal. He said he has never in all his years with MCEA seen a topic light on fire like data centers. It will be addressed in this legislature. And interfacing with your local representatives and senators there's never been a better time for it.
I'm just going to add, I think what surprises me, it just seems so backwards.
Oh, completely.
In a time that we're trying to move so forward environmentally and energy-wise, it just seems so odd and to just do these. And it also, to me, is ironic how, we all have little chips in computers that have gotten so small. And now all of a sudden we need huge data centers, which I'm sure that's a whole other science that I don't understand, but it doesn't make sense on these levels. Yeah.
Those data centers, by the way, are for AI. So don't listen to people tell you they're to store photos or for your cell phone or for medical records. That stuff is being taken care of with existing infrastructure, the little legacy data centers and so forth. This is for AI. One other point that I will make, and I don't know whether it'll happen or not, but there are many environmental groups who are pushing for a one-year moratorium. That's what they're asking for is, look, put the brakes on this for a year. It's clear that there's not enough power in the state of Minnesota for all of these data centers, and we've already heard the story from some communities where the water folks are saying, we can't drill enough water for this, so what are we going to do? So that's really not a bad idea to encourage your legislature to say, put a moratorium on this for a year and figure this out. This wild, wild west where developers are trying to be the first in line to get their allocation of water and their allocation of power does not serve the citizenry of Minnesota well.
Should you play that sound?
I'm sorry?
The sound, you have that recorded?
Do you want to, did we have that on before? The sound, you want to turn it on? This is what a data center, by the way, we'll play it for just 30 seconds. This is what a data center sounds like, half a mile.
Can I say something while she's trying to get that up?
The one thing we haven't talked about is the energy use. And I know it's about water today, but energy blackouts are going to happen. And I don't know about the rest of you, but in the middle of summer, when it's hotter than Hades out there, and I can't have my air conditioning on because we're in a blackout, I'm not going to be happy. How about the rest of you?
I feel sorry for your legislature.
Do you want to add anything, Mo? Because you're a better energy person than I am, but you're right. And another thing, that's not a doubt. Another thing that I've also tried to encourage, I was up sometimes to the legislature. They got sick of seeing my face up there. And my theme was always, we're no different than other places that have got these. And so, yeah, what you just described happens. Life is different in those communities where data centers have come in. And it just bothers me to think, why can't they see that? Have we got the... All right, well, while we're waiting, you have another question, Mr. Kutzon?
My question, I'm kind of new to learning about data centers. So you said one thing about the amount of water that would be used to generate electricity, and maybe I just don't understand electricity, but I wondered if requiring them to use solar to power the data center would be helpful in reducing that.
7 million.
So having green energy, solar, wind would help. But sometimes the challenge becomes we don't have the sun all the time. So like for our residential use, at night most everybody's asleep, lights are off, but data centers run 7 by 20, 365 days a week, so a year. So they need to have that consistent power. I think having the other sources definitely helps, but at the rates that we see how much power they need, it's very hard today to provide that capacity. So, but it definitely helps. And I think that's one of the reasons that we are being targeted is because we are farther along than some of the other states in our green energy scenario.
Another question?
Just another concern. I mean, you were talking about construction jobs, and also there was mention of why data centers come to certain cities. And it's my belief, and I know some information that, you know, when they come to the smaller cities, it's because they're going to give money to the city up front because the city has been less than financially secure. So they kind of give them a parachute going into it, and that gets the city to sign on and go with that. But when you talk about jobs in our area in Farmington, there will be some jobs, but you got to keep in mind that the jobs that they want to promise doesn't mean those people are going to live in our community neither. They come here to work and they take their money out of our communities, so it really doesn't benefit your community a whole lot as much as they want to promise it.
There is there's actually 2 articles from an organization called Good Jobs First. It's a nonprofit out of DC that does research about the very type of things we're talking about. And one of the biggest discrepancies that they found is that jobs promised and jobs actually created are 2 different things. In their research, every place where data centers have proliferated, they have jobs promised, but only 4 states would actually promote or publish statistics about how many were actually created, and it was far fewer than was promised. The other thing that was in the Good Jobs First article is that with the state tax exemptions, that's costing, it was budgeted in 2012 at $5 million. Last year it cost the state $120 million, and we don't have any data centers yet. Senator McQuaid from Apple Valley here said this could be $1 billion by the end of the decade. That was her guess. When you look at the cost per job created after build-out, not construction jobs, but after build-out, compared to the tax exemptions, then you'll see that this is crazy, but this is in the article. Every permanent job costs between $1.5 and $2.5 million of tax exemptions for that state to create that job. And it's just mind-boggling. That to me spells bankruptcy. You know, that is not good economic policy. No one would run a business like that. So the whole jobs thing is, it's extremely well documented in the literature that the jobs at permanent build-out is a myth. And even the construction jobs, yes, they'll be there, but your point's well taken. And the traveling crews that run the circuit of construction of these things, a lot of times doing the more highly technical types of construction, they're done by traveling teams, not by locals.
Do we want to wrap this up with just kind of the sound from like half a mile away?
All right, what you're listening to is the sound. We'll just listen to it half a mile away from a data center at 55 decibels.
January 9th. It's raining, lightly raining out here right now. That noise you're hearing is from the XAI power plant in South Haven, Mississippi. About half a mile, 3,000 feet.
Are we good? I can hardly stand it.
I'm standing in my bed.
Yeah.
50. You can hear this up to 2.5 miles away, if not
sound, they, like, Sarah was saying that the
Yeah.
sound, even when you put an earplug inside your house, you still hear it. It's that kind of.
Yeah,
55
the gentleman had
decibels
said
is
for
within
like-
the MPCA's
Yeah, the gentleman has
law.
said that wearing earplugs at night doesn't help at all. Because it's the low frequency noise permeates his home a half mile away. And he has friends that are 3 miles away and they hear it. And they hear it and they feel it.
In Farmington, it's how many feet away?
Yeah. 250 feet away.
There's almost 1,000 homes of 1 bedroom or greater within 1 mile of the center of the Fountain Valley Golf Course. 1,000 homes. And those homes will all be impacted. There's a great display as you leave in the, behind, facing that way, of the light pollution at Meta in Rosemont. So please take a gander at that. Please pick up your free copy of the Minnesota Women's Press. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for any contributions that you can make for illegal fees. It really is a contribution to the whole community. And thank you for coming out on this very cold night.
Thank you.